The clay is still wet when you press your seal into it, and your hand will not stop shaking. Apil Ilishu will not look at you. 3 witnesses stand in his courtyard, waiting for you to finish rolling the cylinder across the tablet's face, and not one of them knows that this man taught you how to write your first number. That morning is 30 years away. Right now, you are 9 years old, and the only clay you have ever touched is the mud your mother scrapes off your sandals at the door. Your father kneels in the courtyard with a lump of river clay flattened between his palms, and you crouch beside him close enough to smell it. Wet earth, faintly sour, cooling in the shade of the mud brick wall. A neighbor stands over him, waiting. Grain has changed hands. Now the clay has to remember it. Your father presses a reed stylus into the surface, line after wedge-shaped mark, and you cannot read a single one of them yet. What you can read is his face. Steady, unhurried, the same face he wears counting sheep or arguing a price at the market gate. When the writing is done, he takes a small stone cylinder from a cord at his wrist and rolls it once across the wet surface. A picture blooms where there was nothing. A man standing before a god, a line of tiny reeds, a shape only this one cylinder in all of Babylon can make. Why do you carve it twice, you ask? Because you have watched him wrap a second, thicker skin of clay around the first tablet and press the seal into that as well. He does not look up, because a man's memory bends to suit him. Clay does not. He sets the wrapped tablet in the sun to harden, where it will sit for 2 more days before anyone is allowed to touch it again. Later, when the neighbor is gone, your father presses the dry, broken half of an old practice tablet into your hand. It is the first thing that has ever felt like his to give and yours to keep. Numbers, your father tells you, never need to be believed. They only need to be read. You do not know yet how many years you will spend proving him right, or that the courtyard you will remember longest, out of all of them, will not be this one. It will be Apil Ilishu's. By mid-morning, the courtyard has filled with a smell you already know, river clay drying in the sun. But this time, it is not a neighbor's business. A farmer named Ibni Adad stands with his cap twisted in both hands, asking your father for enough barley to seed 2 fields before the flood season closes the roads. Your father does not answer with barley. He answers with a number. A third more when the grain comes in. He says it the way he says everything, flat, unhurried, already written before it left his mouth. Not because I choose it. The king carved that number into stone before either of us was born. Everyone in Babylon has heard of the stele by now, 282 judgments, set down by Hammurabi himself, so that no man in this city can claim later that the law said something other than what it says. Ibni Adad does not argue. Nobody argues with a number that belongs to the king and not to your father. You watch the whole transaction from the doorway, the reed stylus, the cylinder rolled twice, the clay wrapped and sealed and set to bake in the heat. Your father catches you watching and says the only close thing to a joke you have ever heard him make. The gods have never once complained about a properly sealed loan. Then his face goes serious again, the way it always does before he asks something of you. He hands you the finished tablet, still faintly warm, and tells you to carry it across the city to the temple scribe who keeps such things safe, alone. He does not ask if you are ready. He simply closes the courtyard gate behind you and lets you find out. The tablet is heavier than it looks, or maybe it only feels that way because it is the first thing anyone has trusted you to carry without watching you carry it. 5 years of carrying other men's clay across Babylon have taught you the weight of a tablet before you ever open it. Light, and the news inside is probably nothing. Heavy, and someone's whole season rides on what's pressed into the surface. Today, the one in your hands is light, but the problem your father has set you is not. He draws 2 columns in a fresh patch of wet clay, side by side, and hands you the stylus. A field laborer earns 8 gur of barley in a year, he says. Write that down. Now write a loan of the same size, at the rate the law allows, and tell me which grows faster, his wage or my interest. You work it slowly, tongue between your teeth. 33 and a third for grain running against his flat 8 gur a year, and the second column pulls ahead of the first so quickly it unsettles you. Then your father adds one more line, a trick he learned from a scribe at the temple school. Interest charged not once, but again, on what the interest itself has already earned. The Babylonians even have a name for it, interest upon interest, and scribes solve it as a puzzle, the way other boys solve puzzles about canals and bricks. You solve it. The number that comes out the other end is larger than anything a farmer like Ibn Adad could earn in 10 years of honest labor, compounded from a debt small enough to seed 2 fields. Good, your father says, and for a moment, you think that is the end of the lesson. It is not. He looks at the number for a long moment before he speaks again, and something in his voice has changed. Not pride now, something closer to warning. Remember what that number costs a man who cannot pay it. You will need to, one day. You do not understand yet what kind of remembering he means. You will. The judge's bench is warm under your palm when you lean against it. Sun-baked wood, worn smooth by however many men have stood exactly here before you, waiting on a verdict that isn't theirs to give. By 18, you no longer carry other men's tablets. You witness their endings. The dispute in front of the bench is a small one, as these things go. 3 shekels of silver, borrowed 2 harvests ago by a potter named Sin Idinam, unpaid through a bad flood year, and a worse one after it. 3 judges sit in judgment, with the city elders beside them, and the potter's creditor states his claim with his hand raised toward the sun disk of Shamash, swearing the debt is real before he swears anything else. Nobody argues the numbers. The tablet is sealed. The tablet does not lie. What is argued, briefly, almost gently, is what happens next. The judges reach for the same law your father once traced into wet clay for you as a lesson. A man who cannot meet his debt may give himself, his wife, his children, into the house of the man he owes for 3 years. In the 4th year, freedom returns to them by the same authority that took it. You watch Sinadinam's wife when the ruling is spoken aloud, braced for what you assume a stranger should feel at hearing her family handed over like grain. What you see instead unmakes something in you, relief. 3 years, not 5. Not for life, not for her children's children. 3 years, and then a scribe will write it closed. In this city, that is what mercy is shaped like. You are asked to stand as a witness to the sealing, your name recorded alongside men twice your age, your seal, new, barely used, pressed for the first time into a decision that will cost a family 3 years of their lives. Walking home, you find yourself doing arithmetic you did not ask to do. How far away you stand, tonight, from being the man on either side of that tablet. The crier's voice reaches your street before the words do. That particular pitch, a man uses only for news too large for an ordinary morning. You step out into the lane with half the household behind you, and the crier is already 3 doors down, calling it again for the neighbors who missed it the first time. Hammurabi is dead. You are 21, and you have never once considered that the king carved into the stone at the temple of Marduk, the same stone whose numbers you have spent your whole life reading, was an old man who could simply stop breathing like anyone else. His son takes the throne without a ripple you can see from your street. Samsu Iluna, a name you repeat once to see how it sits in your mouth. It sits strangely for only a few weeks. Then a second crier comes, and this one does not announce a death. He announces a Mesharum, the new king's justice, proclaimed the way every new king's reign begins, though nobody your age has lived through one before. Certain debts are canceled. Certain men sold for arrears are to be released. Somewhere in the temple archive, a scribe you have never met is dissolving sealed tablets in a basin of water, and the marks your own father once told you clay does not forget are forgetting anyway, by royal order, on purpose. 2 of your own loans are on that list. 4 years of careful lending, Grain, silver, patience, washed out from under you in a single afternoon, and there is no judge to appeal to, because the king himself is the judge here. And this is not injustice. This is the law, working exactly as your father always said it would. You stand in your own courtyard afterward with an emptier ledger than you started the year with, and understand for the first time that being right about the law and being safe inside it are not the same thing. If you've ever watched a system work exactly as intended and still felt robbed by it, that's worth a comment below. It's the exact contradiction this whole life is built on. You will not make that mistake again. You are not yet sure what to do instead. Her gate is cedar, not the mud brick everyone else builds with. You notice that before you notice anything else. The smell of real wood, strange in a city, raised entirely out of river clay. The house 3 doors from the grain market belongs to a woman you have heard of but never met. And by the time you knock, you already know you are not the only lender in Babylon who has heard her name. Erishti Aya, a Naditu of Shamash, unmarried by vow, childless by vow, and, according to every merchant who has lost a customer to her this season, better at reading a debtor's face than any man twice her years in the trade. She receives you in a courtyard as ordinary as your own, dowry funded and entirely her own to spend, and gets to the point before you do. You charge a shekel and a third, she says. I charge a shekel and 5/6, 3 doors down, for the same risk. It is not a boast, it is an opening move. You had expected a rival. What she offers instead is a partnership. Her capital and her reputation among the women of the Gagum, who trust her judgment on a debtor's honesty more than they trust any Tankarum seal, joined to your reach among the grain merchants and the temple stores, she cannot easily approach herself. She reminds you, almost gently, of a name still spoken in the Gagum with respect, Amat Mamu, a Naditu of the last generation who fought off 2 cousins in open court to keep an inheritance willed to her, and won. We are not permitted into a tavern, Erishtiaya says, without bitterness, stating it the way she'd state a weight or a measure. The law is very clear that we would be burned alive for trying. It says nothing at all about a ledger. You take the partnership. It is the first decision in your career that is not, in some way, your father's. It will make you wealthier, faster than anything he ever taught you, and it will cost you something he never had to pay. The temple courtyard smells of baked clay and burnt sesame oil the morning the priests send for you, incense still curling off the altar from the dawn rites. By 30, your seal no longer needs explaining at the gate. The priests of Marduk know your name well enough to send for you when the god's storehouse holds more silver than the god's own accounts require, and what they offer you that year is not a loan you take out. It is capital you are trusted to put back to work. You have heard of men who built fortunes this way before you. Not met them. And Larsa are river days from Babylon, but their names travel the way good grain travels, ahead of the harvest. A financier of named Dumuzi Gamil, tied close enough to the temple of Nana that no one agrees whether he serves it or simply borrows its confidence. 41 tablets deep in loans by the last count anyone bothered to take. A bigger man still in Larsa, Balmanum Hay, whose fortune spans fields and fish and money lending all at once. The kind of name mothers still invoke when they want a merchant's son to sit up straighter. You are not them, but you understand, now, the shape of what they built, because the Temple of Marduk has just handed you the same shape in miniature, silver that is not yours, lent out under your seal, at your risk, for a share too large to walk away from. Erishti Aya warns you before you sign it. The temple does not lend because it trusts you, she says, turning your own contract over to check the seal impressions herself, the way she checks everyone's. It lends because your name is now worth more than your surety. Those are not the same thing, and only one of them can be taken from you in a single bad season. You sign anyway. The wrapped tablet goes into the sun to harden beside a dozen others already baking there, and for the first time in your life, your ledger reaches south, past Babylon's own fields, into contracts that touch merchants in Larsa, in Ur, in cities you have never once had reason to visit. You do not yet think of that as a risk. You think of it as reach. The smell reaches you before the words do, river mud, and something sharper underneath it, fear, thick on men who have not slept in days. The boatmen bring the news up the Euphrates before the criers get hold of it, which is how you always know a thing is serious. The water hears first. Larsa has risen. A man calling himself Rimsin, claiming some thread of blood to the old king Hammurabi once humbled, has taken the city in Samsu-Iluna's 8th year on the throne, and by the time the story reaches your courtyard, it has already grown teeth. Uruk has joined him. Then Ison. Then a string of southern cities whose names you know only from the backs of loan tablets, places you have never walked through but have lent silver into for 15 years on the strength of a name and a seal. You do the arithmetic before you decide how to feel about it, because that is what your father trained you to do, and the arithmetic is bad. A third of your ledger runs south of Nippur. You have no way to collect a debt from a city that no longer answers to the king whose courts would enforce it. The war does not last long. Samsu-Iluna's soldiers come down the river faster than the rebellion expected, and the boatmen bring that news too, in pieces, over months. Ur's walls pulled down stone by stone, the same for Uruk, the same for Ison, Rimsin the pretender dead in the ruins of the city he'd claimed. You should feel relief. The king has won. What you feel instead, standing in a market thinning with refugees who arrive with nothing but what they carried out, is closer to grief for a version of your ledger that will simply never be collected. Ur's scribes have stopped writing entirely, and no one you ask can say whether they ever will again. Among the refugees, one afternoon, you recognize a face you have not seen since boyhood. A boy who once knelt beside you outside the edge of a wall, guiding your clumsy hand through your very first wedge-shaped marks in wet sand, before either of you owned a proper tablet. Apil Ilishu, thinner now, and carrying, you will learn within the week, considerably less than he owes you. You do not yet know what that debt will cost either of you. You are about to find out. His sandals are worn through at the sole. You notice that before anything else, standing in your own doorway. And Apil Ilishu has not come to ask for a loan. He has come to explain why he cannot repay 3 shekels of silver, borrowed the season after Larsa fell, when half his usual buyers had vanished south with the war, and the other half were too frightened to spend. You had not called it a loan of mercy at the time. You had called it a fair rate for an old friend, and meant it, and the number was still the number. He does not argue the sum. He knows it as well as you do. You both learned to read numbers from men who trained you the same way, in the same dust outside the same schoolyard wall. There is a law for this, he says, before you can, because he has clearly rehearsed saying it first so that you would not have to. You know it better than I do. You do know it. You have watched it applied to a stranger's family when you were 18 years old, standing in a courtroom as a witness with a seal too new to matter, and you had gone home that night doing arithmetic about which side of that tablet you would one day stand on. You have your answer now, 21 years later, and it is not the side you had hoped. This is not a story about a fair price. This is not a story about an old friendship. This is a story about a debt that does not care which one you thought you were keeping. 3 witnesses gather in his courtyard the following morning. Not strangers this time, men you both know, men who once ate at his table. The judges are not needed for a debt this small and this openly admitted. The law only requires the sealing, and you are the one who must press it. His wife stands to one side, not crying, because she has clearly braced herself the same practiced way the potter's wife once did, though the sight of it does not comfort you the way it once might have. 3 years, she is telling herself. 3 years, and then a scribe writes it closed. The clay is still wet when you press your seal into it, and your hand will not stop shaking. Apil Ilishu will not look at you. You finish rolling the cylinder across the tablet's face, and the picture blooms where there was nothing. The same picture your father's seal once made, a man standing before a god. And none of the three witnesses in this courtyard know that this particular man once knelt in the dust and guided your clumsy hand through your very first mark. If you've followed a life this far and already know exactly what these next 3 years cost, on both sides of that seal, that kind of attention is rare. Worth a subscribe if you want to see where it ends. The law does not require you to hate him for this. It only requires 3 years. You are only beginning to understand that those are not the same mercy. The walk to the grain market takes you past his gate, whether you plan it or not. Your feet finding the same worn path morning after morning, without asking your permission first. 3 years is not a long time to count in gur and shekels. It is a very long time to count in mornings. Samsu Iluna spends those years rebuilding what the rebellion cost him. Walls raised again at Kish, at Nippur, at Sippar, the northern half of his kingdom stitched back into something that functions, even as the south stays what it has become, silent. You hear, eventually, that scribes in Nippur and Isin are still writing, still keeping the old habits alive, nearly 30 years into the new king's reign, while and Larsa write nothing at all anymore, to anyone, for any reason. Whole cities, gone quiet, the way a debtor goes quiet, when there is truly nothing left to say. Your own ledger recovers faster than the South ever will. Trade finds new roads. New names replace the ones you lost. By the standard the temple judges you on, you are, if anything, more successful for having survived the collapse than you were before it. You do not feel successful walking past Apil Ilishu's house on your way to the grain market, which you have arranged, without quite admitting it to yourself, to do more often than the route requires. Nothing in the 282 laws requires you to let a man go before his 4th year begins. Nothing forbids it either. You spend longer than you expect staring at that particular silence in the law, the shape of a thing it simply does not say, before you understand that you have been waiting for permission that was never going to arrive, because the choice was never the law's to make. It was always yours. You go to the temple scribe the next morning and ask for a basin of water. The basin the temple scribe gives you is smaller than you expected, plain-fired clay, water still cool from the well, and you carry it yourself across the city, rather than sending a boy, because some things a man should carry with his own hands. Apil Ilishu's courtyard has not changed since the morning you sealed his dead in it. Same mud brick wall, same patch of shade where 3 witnesses once stood. This time, there is no witness but him and his wife, standing in the doorway with an expression you cannot yet read. You take the tablet from where it has sat, unbroken, in the corner of his storeroom for 2 years and 10 months, and you lower it into the water. You do not read the marks pressed into it as they soften. You do not need to. You already know what it says, the way you have known what every number in your life has said before you asked it to be believed. Your father once told you clay does not bend the way a man's memory does, that this was its whole virtue, the reason a seal meant something a promise alone never could. He was not wrong, but he never told you that a man could choose to bend the clay himself, on no authority but his own, for no reason a king would recognize as justice. You understand, watching the wedge marks dissolve into a formless gray, that this is not the law working exactly as your father said it would. This is something your father never had a word for, because it was never his to give. Apil Ilishu says nothing. He does not need to. 10 months early is 10 months he did not expect, and some debts, you have learned, are not the kind a tablet was ever built to hold. You set the empty basin down in the same courtyard where you once pressed a seal you could not stop your hand from shaking to complete. This time, your hand is steady. Numbers, your father told you once, never need to be believed. They only need to be read. It has taken you 33 years to learn that some things are neither.